On this episode of Cinema Disaster, we're going to be talking about the 1986 Fred Dekker film, Night of the Creeps. Fred Dekker, you might know, also did the film Monster Squad. He directed that, and he co-wrote it with Shane Black. He also was a director for RoboCop 3, which he actually co-wrote with the comic book legend Frank Miller, who you probably know from his works on Daredevil, The Dark Knight Returns, Sin City, 300. I mean, he's been involved in tons and tons of shit. Fred Dekker also did a film called House, which he wrote, and Steve Miner from the Friday the 13th franchise, or the Friday the 13th fame, shall I say. Steve Miner directed that film. He also did Friday the 13th 2 and 3. If anybody had seen Monster Squad, then you know that that whole film was, a love letter to the, all the old Universal monster films that Fred Dekker grew up watching. And this movie, Night of the Creeps, is no different when it comes to Dekker, pretty much like wearing his influences on his sleeve. This whole movie is probably, it's just homage after homage after homage of all of these directors and filmmakers that he grew up loving, all the people that inspired him to become a filmmaker. I know there's references to The Blob in this film, as well as a bunch of old science fiction movies. Some of the names in this movie are even tributes to some of his favorite directors. We have Chris Romero for, obviously, George Romero, a character named Cynthia Cronenberg for David Cronenberg, guy named Ray Cameron for, obviously, James Cameron, J.C. Carpenter for John Carpenter, and the whole thing takes place at Corman University, which is obviously a reference to filmmaker Roger Corman. The whole movie there's tons of great actors in this. Jason Lively, who you probably know from National Lampoon's European Vacation, is Rusty. We got Jill Withlow, Steve Marshall. Alan Kaiser plays a guy named Brad, who you know as Bubba Higgins from the TV show Mama's Family. And we got Tom Atkins. And Tom Atkins, as you know, or maybe you don't, I don't know. I don't really know who's watching this, probably no one. But The Fog, Escape from New York, Maniac Cop, Halloween 3. I mean, he's been in a lot of the greats, a lot of the classics. Pretty much like this. What's great about this film is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. So, it adds elements of science fiction as well as horror and comedy, slasher elements, as well as I don't know, it's like the college movie type thing, So it starts off in the 1950s on Lover's Lane, and there's an escaped axe killer on the loose. And this is where you sort of get like the whole Blob inspiration. They see like a comet coming in. That same scene with the comet coming in on Lover's Lane, the Kyoto brothers did an homage to that in Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I mean, lots of filmmakers have done homages to the Blob. But so it starts off with in the 50s with that whole scene, and then it jumps to now, would be present time, which I guess would be at the time 1986. And the whole tone of the film, has this has a very comedic element to it. So you sort of almost feel like you're watching a comedy, but there's lots of good gore and blood scenes in this. You have zombies, you have alien slugs, you have Tom Atkins one-liners, you have all sorts of stuff going on with this movie. I caught this real late one night, probably about 10, 11 years ago, possibly, on TV, and I caught it maybe 15 minutes in, and I originally stopped because I noticed Jason Lively from European Vacation, which is a film that I grew up on, and he's always been my favorite Rusty out of all the ones that have played him. So I stopped and started watching it, and I found the movie to be very intriguing, very interesting, and funny at the same time. And I had no clue what the title of this film even was. I had to look it up and find out that it was Night of the Creeps. So I ended up finding this copy here at I don't know if I found this. I think I found this at Goodwill for like $2. I don't know what moron traded this in, but I do want to note a difference in which I think I talked about in my VHS episode. I'm not sure if I did or not, but the original cover art is really cool. You've got the zombie in the prom suit, and the tagline is, "The good news is your date is here. The bad news is he's dead." With the Blu-ray release, they kept the tagline, but they completely changed the cover. So you've still got the good news is your dates are here, bad news is they're dead. But then you have this. So no guy in a prom suit. This doesn't make any sense. So the art on the Blu-ray, I mean, although the Blu-ray is great, as far as quality and the way it looks, the cover doesn't make any sense at all. The original artwork was incredible, I thought, and they should have stuck with that. I found a T-shirt of this actually on Rotten Cotton. I still own it to this day. That's not the only difference about the Blu-ray release, though. There was an alternate ending to this film. Now, I've viewed the VHS more times than I've viewed the Blu-ray, so I'm used to the ending in that. However, the alternate ending, which I won't spoil it for anyone, is on the Blu-ray, and sometimes it's played on, if you see it on television or whatever. It was not the ending that I saw on television when I saw it. The one on the VHS is the one that I saw originally. So I guess I'm more partial to that one, probably because that's what I was introduced to first. I don't necessarily think that the alternate ending is bad. It's just not what I'm used to. So maybe over time, when I get used to both more, I can make a rational decision of which ending I like. There was an unofficial sequel to this film released in Germany, I think, called Zombie Town, which honestly has nothing to do with this film at all. It is just trying to market itself as a sequel to try and capitalize on this film. That's been done before. I talked about it in the last video I did when I talked about Dead Alive, how sometimes movie titles change in international markets or foreign markets. I talked about how Lucio Fulci's Beyond was also called Seven Doors to Death, and Dead Alive was also released as Brain Dead. Well, Dawn of the Dead, the George Romero one from '78, in the international market was released under the name Zombie. So when Lucio Fulci made his own film Zombie, it was released as Zombie 2. It was marketed as a sequel to Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which it was not. So here's where it gets a little confusing. So Zombie 2 is actually Zombie 1. Gets its own standalone film. I mean, Lucio Fulci's a great filmmaker. He also did, besides The Beyond, he also did House by the Cemetery. And, You know my brain's freezing now, but he's done a lot of great stuff. But Zombie 2 was also released under the name Island of the Living Dead, Zombie Flesh Eaters, Zombie the Dead Walk Among Us. Then Fulci made Zombie 3, and that is a direct sequel to Zombie 2, which Zombie 2 is actually Zombie 1, which means that Zombie 3 is actually Zombie 2. I told you that it gets confusing there. There's been a lot of other films that have been released, I would say, that try to capitalize on being the third film in the Dawn of the Dead trilogy, which, as we know, the third film is Day of the Dead. It goes Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Survival of the Dead. But the unofficial, like I said, there's other Zombie 3 films. So we have Zombie 3 Night Terror, Return of the Zombies, and neither one of those is a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, or even a sequel to Zombie, for that matter. Then we also have a movie called Burial Ground. And I apologize if I butcher this name, because I probably will. Andrea Bianacchi's film Burial Ground is another great film in its own right. It has been marketed as Zombie 3. But once again, it's, like I said, a cool film, but not part of the Fulci trilogy, or I guess wouldn't be a trilogy. Two films Fulci did, and it's also not part of the Romero Dead series. But as you can see, all of this, with international marketing, it can get confusing. And anyway, Night of the Creeps, if you're in for something fun, very lighthearted, if you're a fan of science fiction, comedies, college films, fans of zombie films, or just blood, gore, that kind of thing, Night of the Creeps is an absolute must-see. And if you like Fred Dekker, like if you know him from Monster Squad or House, or, he did another great film. He wrote a film called If Looks Could Kill, which is a comedy with Richard Grieco. I've always been a fan of that movie. It's sort of like a spoof. I don't want to say a spoof, but it's a take on spy films. Grieco is the hapless idiot that doesn't realize that he's a spy and that kind of thing. I would suggest that too, checking that out if you're into comedy and stuff like that. But yeah, Night of the Creeps. Check this out, and I'll be coming back again at some point with another review. I know I have some on my list to do. Me and Sam is going to guest star again, which you saw in our review of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle film. And you also saw him in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Planes, Trains, and Automobile review. We're going to come back again and do Tim Burton's Batman from 1989. A friend of mine named Darren is going to sit in one night, and we're going to do Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. I also have plans in the future to do some other films. So until next time, check out Night of the Creeps and keep watching.